Every morning, an old man comes and sits on the same bench. People pass by him, laughing, rushing, moving. Once, he believed that time would never run out. He chose work and left love for later. Today, he has everything except time. If he could tell you just one thing, it would be this: don't wait. Time leaves without saying goodbye. Every morning, just as the sun rose above the trees, Mr. Daniel came to the park and sat on the same wooden bench. The bench was old like him, its paint faded, its edges worn smooth by time. Beside him sat his wife, Margaret. Her hair was silver now, her hands thin but warm. They sat close, not because they needed warmth, but because closeness had become their language. That morning the air was calm. Birds chirped, children laughed in the distance, and the world felt young again. Everything except them. Daniel stared ahead, his eyes fixed on nothing and everything at once. After a long silence, he spoke softly. "Margaret," he said, his voice trembling, "if I could get just one day of my youth back." Margaret turned to him surprised. She had heard many things from him over the years, but not this. She waited. "I wouldn't waste it," he continued. "Not on work, not on chasing money, not on pride." Margaret smiled gently, but her eyes filled with tears. Daniel closed his eyes, and suddenly the park disappeared. His mind travelled back to when his back was straight. His steps were fast, and time felt endless. Back then he believed tomorrow was guaranteed. "I remember when I was young," he said. "I thought life was long. I thought love could wait. I thought people would always be there." He paused. "I was wrong." Margaret placed her hand over his. "We were all wrong," she whispered. Daniel looked around the park. Young couples walked hand in hand. Teenagers laughed loudly, unaware of how precious their time was. A boy sat scrolling on his phone, ignoring the sunset above him. "They don't know," Daniel said. "They think youth is forever." Margaret nodded. "Just like we did." Daniel sighed deeply. "If I had one day of youth, I would wake up early just to feel strong again. I would hug my parents longer. I would tell you I loved you without waiting for the right moment." His voice broke. "I spent my youth planning for life," he said, "but I forgot to live it." Margaret leaned her head on his shoulder. "But we lived enough to sit here together," she said softly. Daniel smiled faintly. "Yes, but I wish the young could hear us. I wish they could learn without pain." The wind passed through the trees, carrying his words into the air. Words meant for the young, for those who still believed time was unlimited. Daniel remembered the days when tomorrow felt endless. He was 25, full of dreams and impatience. He worked long hours, convinced that success was the key to happiness. Every morning he left home before sunrise, promising himself he would rest later. Every night he returned exhausted, telling himself love could wait. Margaret was young then too. She waited for him with dinner on the table, hope in her eyes and questions in her heart. "How was your day?" she would ask. "Busy," he would reply. He thought that was enough. Daniel believed that once he earned enough money, life would begin. He didn't realize that life was already happening. Quietly, gently, slipping through his fingers. His parents used to call him often. "Come visit us," his mother would say. "We miss you." "Soon," he always replied. "I'm busy right now." Soon never came. One day, the phone rang with news he was not ready for. His mother was gone. Daniel remembered standing at the funeral, surrounded by people, feeling empty. He realized then that time had moved faster than he ever imagined. "I thought I had more time," he whispered to Margaret that night. She held him and said nothing. Years passed. Children were born. Responsibilities grew heavier. Daniel worked harder, thinking sacrifice was love. But love needed presence, not promises. Now, sitting on the bench decades later, Daniel felt the weight of those years. "Youth is cruel," he told Margaret. "It makes you believe you are invincible." Margaret smiled sadly. And old age teaches you the truth. Daniel watched a young man argue with his girlfriend nearby. I want to tell him, Daniel said, that pride is expensive. It costs you moments you can never buy back. Margaret squeezed his hand. Maybe he will learn. Maybe not. Daniel sighed. That's the tragedy. Wisdom comes when it's no longer useful for us, but it could save them. He looked at his hands. Hands that once built dreams, now shaking slightly. If I could give advice to my younger self, he said, I would say, stop running. Life is not a race. Sit, listen, love. The sun climbed higher, but Daniel felt the cold of regret settle deep inside his chest. One of Daniel's greatest regrets was not what he did, but what he never said. There were so many moments he stayed silent when words mattered most. I love you, he rarely said when he was young. He assumed Margaret knew. I'm proud of you. He never told his children enough. He thought providing was enough. I'm sorry, he struggled to say, believing apologies made him weak. Now, sitting beside Margaret, he realized silence could be heavier than words. Do you remember, he asked her softly, how many times you waited for me to talk? Margaret nodded slowly. I waited, she said, but I also understood. Daniel's eyes filled with regret. Understanding should never replace effort. Margaret smiled gently. We grew together, slowly, painfully, but together. Daniel watched a young couple walk by, laughing loudly, teasing each other. Their love was fresh, unscarred by time. They think love is easy, Daniel said. They don't know it needs care, patience, and courage. He took a deep breath. If I had one day of youth, he said, I would speak more. I would say the things I was afraid to say. Margaret looked at him. Say them now, she whispered. Daniel turned to her, his voice shaking. I love you. I always did. Even when I was quiet. Even when I was wrong. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. I know, she said, but hearing it still matters. Daniel realized something then. Time steals opportunities, but not all of them. Some moments can still be saved. But youth didn't know this. Youth believed silence was safe. Daniel wished the young could understand that words unsaid become regrets remembered. He looked at the sky and whispered, Please don't wait. Every wrinkle on Daniel's face carried a lesson. Each line told a story of sacrifice, love, fear, and missed chances. Youth sees wrinkles as ugliness, Daniel said. But they are evidence. Evidence that we lived. Margaret laughed softly. And survived. Daniel nodded. Barely sometimes. He watched a group of young people take selfies, trying to freeze time in pictures. They want to look perfect, he said. They don't realize perfection is living honestly. Daniel believed youth chased the wrong things. Money before meaning, success before happiness, pride before peace. If I had one day of youth, he said, I would fail without fear. I would love without conditions. I would forgive faster. Margaret listened quietly. I would tell the young, Daniel continued, that life doesn't wait for readiness. It moves, always. He pointed at the trees. Look at them. They grow without asking permission. Daniel smiled sadly. We spent too much time preparing to live. Margaret rested her head on his shoulder again. But we are here, she said, still together. Daniel nodded. That is our victory. As the sun began to set, Daniel stood up slowly, holding Margaret's hand. If someone young were listening, he said, this is what I would tell them. He imagined his words traveling through time. Value your time. Hug your loved ones. Speak your truth. Rest when you can. Love deeply. Forgive quickly. Margaret added softly. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Life happens now. Daniel smiled. Youth, he said, is not about age. It's about awareness. Don't lose it while chasing tomorrow. He looked at Margaret one last time. I didn't get one day of my youth back, he said, but I learned its value too late. Margaret squeezed his hand. Maybe your story will save someone else's. Daniel smiled at that thought. As they walked away from the bench, the park grew quiet. But their words stayed behind, waiting for the young to hear them, because tomorrow is not promised, and today is priceless.